I will say, Ro, and at the time you and I weren't as friendly as we are now. But I was a little hurt when you chose Bernie over me.
Oh, you didn't do a war powers resolution with me, Andrew. I mean, if you were in Congress and we had tried to stop the Yemen war together, I would have picked you,
Oh, I
perhaps.
see how it is. You and Bernie there try to pass laws, try to keep the U.S. out of wars. And just because I wasn't there, you didn't know. I'm kidding.
But one of my
It was,
favorite moments for the presidential debate is when you told Elizabeth Warren, oh, you're so excited Elizabeth Warren had read your book. And I thought, what a moment of humanity, because I'm in the process of writing the book, and I had the same thought. I'd love it. I'd be thrilled if Elizabeth Warren read my book, or Bernie Sanders. And so it was this. I don't know if you remember the moment, but you had this kind of genuine excitement.
I remember that moment. You're writing a book. That's very exciting. Can you share what it's about?
Sure. It's actually about expanding access to the digital economy in rural communities and Black and brown communities, but more broadly also applying the principles of democracy to the digital age. This idea that the social media platforms, that just by creating platforms of communication, that we'd somehow have more deliberation or peace, has turned out not to be true, partly because they've targeted us.
You mean the social media companies haven't made us all smarter, Ro? We're not all like much more sophisticated and educated?
Unfortunately not, but it's the early stages, right? I mean, the interesting thing with the printing press, you go back, you look at the history, it took like hundreds of years when the printing press actually, because of written works, was leading to reactions of actually war and conflict. And it took building of liberal institutions to now come to a consensus that the printing press obviously is a great dissemination of knowledge, but that it wasn't also creating violent reactions. So we're just 20 years into social media. It could be enormous in organizing, but we've got to think through what are the forms of communication, the rules of communication, and how do we give people more choice and not have targeting based on our data in the ways that Facebook has been doing it.
Well, that's one of the things you're trying to solve for with your Internet Bill of Rights. So you're in the midst of this in a way that very few others are. My sense of things is that there are some very well-intended legislators like yourself who understand what's going on with our data that is getting sold and resold in ways that are bad for democracy, bad for our mental health, bad economics, and that it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars and we're not seeing a dime. The financial incentives are not serving us well. And then you have your home state of California that's actually the leader in consumer data rights. My sense of things is that this legislation is kind of stuck in Congress, and that it's more likely that various states end up following California's lead than that Congress passes something that mirrors the California Privacy Act. Is that accurate? Because I'm sure you have your finger on the pulse of what the legislation looks like. And I hope I'm wrong, because I'd be thrilled if there were federal legislation.
We may get federal legislation with Schakowsky, but let me go into some detail here, because I know you and your listeners will appreciate it. Here's the challenge with both the GDPR in Europe and California's consumer rights, and why we need a beefed up FTC and FCC and the federal government to act. One, look at the European fines. I mean, yesterday or a couple of days ago, I read that Italy found that Facebook misused their data, so they're fining them $7 million. I mean, give me a break. Facebook's not going to sneeze.
You saw Illinois. There was a civil settlement for $650 million, which at least would hit their radar screen. But at least that would never hit their radar screen.
I mean, probably it's an intern would notice a $7 million fine. The second thing is, and this is the more important thing, is so when they have these consent, it turns out there was this paper done that these tech companies have been able, through graphics and placement, basically get people to click on yes, I consent almost 80-90% of times.
Oh, God. No one knows what we're agreeing to. None of us. Yeah. I mean, you and I went to law school. We still have no idea what we're agreeing to half the time.
Exactly. And so even with all the good language in the GDPR, so what does this mean? We actually need tech competent people in enforcement agencies at the FTC, at the FCC, and we've got to have them at the table in defining these laws. I don't think a state-by-state approach or just the European approach is going to be any match for these companies. I mean, I see them. They're in my district. And so we absolutely need federal legislation, but more than that, we need the enforcement and tech competent people in those agencies who can say, no, you can't have manipulative design, these dark patterns that basically are manipulating people into consent.
What do you see as the prospects of federal legislation and these enforcement resources that could actually balance the scales? Because I agree with you that right now government is outgunned.
Well, I think it's going to take more people caring about it, right? For so long, it was just, that's just a techie issue. It's just privacy. Why should I care about privacy? Here's why you should care, because 64% of people on Facebook who joined QAnon were there with Facebook recommendations to join. You're now on these public
Facebook
forums.
made some money off of it. Yeah, the whole thing is messed up.
So if you care about the radicalization of our country and the polarization on social media, we've got to care about how our information is being used, not just because of your privacy, because your privacy decision affects the state of our democratic discourse. And so the reason we don't have action on this, frankly, is we don't have the mobilization. No one is out there on very few people are calling me and saying, Ro, we need privacy legislation. We need social media regulated. They're calling me and saying, understandably, we need $15 minimum wage and other issues. But until we have mobilization, this is just going to continue to be stalled.
I'm 100% with you that most people don't understand the urgency of federal data and privacy legislation and enforcement resources, because right now the tech companies are running circles around everybody, and there's not even like a principled debate that's happening that is accurate at all. Like most legislatures just don't understand the set of issues.
But one thing I really admired about your presidential campaign is you had a clear theory of the case, which I happen to share, which is in part that we're going through a digital revolution that is fundamentally transforming society. It's leaving communities out of wealth generation and out of the possibility of staying in their own communities and doing well. And it's also making it much more difficult to have democratic conversation. But it's sort of like we're going and attacking discrete parts of the issue without seeing that there's
a central disease
shift
in the middle of it, man. The central, right. like the social media networks, like this tentacled beast in the middle of the whole thing. If someone wanted to help, would it be helpful if they were to reach out to their member of Congress and say, hey, like get behind this federal data legislation? Like what can the average citizen do?
Absolutely. So Schakowsky's bill is the bill on privacy legislation that would get passed, and it's still being worked on. But I think just being part of the conversation and saying this is something that we ought to care about, and having ideas, sending us the ideas for that, and insisting that this should be part of the agenda for 2022, that this has to be a high priority.
Let's do it, people. Write your members of Congress. Let them know that you think the Fed should pass legislation protecting our data rights and making it so that there's actual enforcement of those rights, and that's not the tech companies laughing all the way to the bank. So that's one thing you're working on, but that's not even the main thing. You're working on trying to get cash out to people. Is that correct? Which obviously I am 100% behind.
Well, you helped with helping Tim Ryan and I conceive of this. We were calling for this in March with your advocacy and help, which said, let's get people $2,000 checks. Partly, I read one of the most compelling studies, which is that so many people, I think I read up to 75% of people who are unemployed aren't getting the unemployment benefits. And I had to reread it to really get that.
Make sure that's true. Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, but people either don't know about it or don't have the wherewithal to be able to get them. So the best way is just get people these checks, and they will spend it locally. They'll make sure their houses aren't getting foreclosed on. They'll be able to help with rent or help the small business landlords. I mean, a lot of people who aren't paying the rent, we're forgetting about the small businesses that are being hurt. So I don't understand why, if we find these trillions of dollars to be bailing out everything else, $8 trillion is what we've spent so far as a country, why we can't get some of the money to the working and middle class.
So you say it's 8. CARES was like 2.2. Are you including this massive number that went to the financial markets? Like, where did you get to 8?
Yeah, that's what I read. When you look at what both the Fed has done and what the Congress has done, and of course there were a number of other packages as well. And you sum up all of that, that is about the spending. But the American people.
Does the 8 include the new 1.9 that we think will pass in March?
No. This is before that.
So it'll be 10. It'll be 10 by the time.
But someone should do this. Someone should have a breakdown of how much money directly went to the American people and how much did the government spend. And it makes no sense why you wouldn't have a large.
It makes no sense at all, man. I mean, I tried to do the math on the CARES Act, and you could have given every American like $6,000 for the amount that was in the CARES Act instead of, what do we get? I think we got maybe 1,200.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you could have, like, you know, made that 5 times bigger and still had money to spare.